chapter 13, verse 17 through chapter 17, verse number 60. And there's a lot of different things that take place here. I'm just going to share briefly something that I had shared last night, and I'm going to get into several other things. It tells us here in the book of Exodus 13:21, Shabbat, chapter 13, verse 21. And Yud-Hey-Vav went before them by day in a cloud, or a column of cloud, and the word cloud in Hebrew, anah, to lead the way, and by night in a column of fire, fire in Hebrew, the word esh, to give them light, so as to go by day and night. So this manifestation of God's presence with them, how do we want to look at that? A cloud by day and a fire by night. A cloud can do several different things. It can regulate temperature. A cloud can produce rain, snow. A cloud is made out of little droplets of water. Of course, a fire, it can produce heat for us if we're cold. It can cook things. It can protect us. It can also damage things. Different things, the idea of a fire. Interesting that God used two different elements here, a cloud and a fire, to help lead his people, one by day and one by night. I had mentioned that as Israel was departing from Egypt, that they were told to go and to ask for the silver, for the gold, and for the material. And they were doing that as they were getting ready to depart and carrying all this with them that later was probably used in the construction of the Mishkan, and then later, for the work of God, giving to God, giving back to God. Sometimes God gives to you so that later you can give to someone else. You can be a blessing. Moses, he had another vision as he was getting the bones of Yosef. As Yosef had said, "Don't leave me here, take my bones with you." And he said, "God will surely visit you." And so he was taking the bones of Joseph, and they carried them for the next 40 plus years. And finally, Joseph, his bones were buried either in Shechem or near Shechem about the time Joshua finally died, and about the time Joshua was buried. So they had his bones, and it's just a testimony. Joseph was one of the first ones that had gone to Egypt, became the leader of Egypt, provided for Israel when the famine was there. He died, they forgot about him, but Israel did not forget about him. Moses did not forget about him. And they kept their promises, carrying. It was a statement of faith as they were carrying these bones. A statement of declaration, carrying this dead body. It might not have meant much to other people that saw it, but it meant something to God's people. It was a statement of faith. It was a reminder that God visited them. This word visit, it can also mean to care, to oversee. It can have a lot of different definitions. The root word is pakad. And it's basically used twice in the book of, here in our Torah portion, Exodus 13:19. The book of Shabbat, chapter 13, verse 19. And Moshe took the bones of Yosef with him. For he had strictly sworn, B'nai Israel, saying, Elohim will surely visit you, and you shall carry my bones away from here with you. And so they're reminded of the exhortation that Yosef had given to them. In the Hebrew, it's basically saying Elohim Yifkod, or Elohim Pakod Yifkod. And he's saying God will visit. So he's kind of saying that God's, in a way, we could say God's going to visit you twice. Some say that could point to Messiah, and it could point to a lot of different things. Here in our Torah portion, God, in a way, he does immerse or baptize Israel in this sea of reeds, Yom Suf. Some say that it was actually a mistranslation to call it the Red Sea. It should be the Sea of Reeds. After they go through the Reed Sea, the enemy is finally removed from them. There's power, many believe, in baptism, in the immersion that removes the power of the enemy. It was the flood that God used to remove the Nephilim, this race, this generation of giants, these men of renown that were created when the sons of God came down and had relations with men. It's believed that the flood came. There are some that say, refers to the scripture, says when a demon is cast out and he goes through dry places seeking rest but finding none. He walks through dry places. And some say the power of water, the power of immersion, does something, the enemy doesn't like it. Some say that that's why God used the flood to destroy these people. Some believe that baptism had the idea of being immersed, does more things than what we realize. We know that as Israel went through the sea, the enemy was completely removed from them. Then, chapter 15, they danced, they celebrated, they shouted, they did their tambourines. The Bible actually says they even began to celebrate in the midst of the water. As the walls, as they were walking through that night, carrying all their silver, their gold, their beautiful material. Once slaves, about to become a free nation. All going forth, Moses and Aaron leading them, not knowing what was ahead. Sometimes that's best. We just live one day at a time. Sometimes if God showed us everything, I don't know if we'll be able to handle it. It's best that we live one day at a time. The Bible says sufficient is the evil that you will encounter today. Don't worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow will take care of itself. Sometimes we get in trouble about things that may never happen. And we're worried about things that may never come to be. Israel celebrated again. You got the Torah scroll. I encourage you, it's pretty easy to find Exodus 15 because of the spacing. And I don't have to show you this morning, but I love the way it's spaced in there. As I said before, it looks kind of like a wall, almost like a brick wall. Some say it looked kind of like the waters of the waves. To me, it looks kind of like a brick wall. They remind me of the walls of water as they went through. As Israel goes through, and they're finally seeing the dead Egyptians on the land, they're finally free from slavery, from the gods of Egypt. The very first thing they come to Mara, there's no water to drink. They've just gone through 10, possibly 11 months of seeing the hand of God, the plagues against the gods of Egypt. They saw miracles after miracle, even the Red Sea. I mean, they saw God's manifesting among them. God visited them, and He visited them. He took care of them, this work to come, and He took care of them multiple times. He continued to oversee their endeavors. That's why we need to be careful not to forget the victories. How soon they forgot. We have no wonder what are we going to do. Oh, I don't know. I guess God is on break now. He did miracles in Egypt, but now that He delivered us, now He's on break. He's taking a break. We're just going to have to wait for a while, because one day with Him is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as one day. You know, they used to say, oh, the days of miracles are gone. And it all passed away in the days of the apostles. Some groups say that kind of thing. Oh, the filling of the Holy Spirit, speaking with tongues, that's all in the past. That was all went out the door with it. That was just to get the initial church started. It's what sometimes people will say, after it got started, and we don't need it anymore. So, interesting ideas, excuses really, for not believing, not trusting for God's power in His hand in our life. Moses prays this water, they can't drink it. They're thirsty. It's been about 3 days. I don't know if you've ever been about 3 days without anything to drink, but you might begin to complain yourself. I would probably begin to cry. You know, sometimes your stomach starts rattling, you know, maybe you haven't started eating a little bit, your head starts hurting. Some of you that drink caffeine, if you don't have caffeine, it's not your head or heart, you haven't got that caffeine headache. Well, they didn't have caffeine drinks back then that I know of. They didn't have soda. They just drank water right there. That was their drink, water. But they didn't have that either. Moses prayed, God showed them a tree. He put the tree in the water, applied it to the water, and the water went from bitter to sweet, and they could drink it. They were thankful. Moses asked him, why are you testing me? Why are you testing God? They tested God. Why did God test them? As a new group of people. What does the tree represent? It can represent a lot of things. It can represent obeying God, obeying His word. It can represent Yeshua. It could, there's a lot of different things we can look. I'm not going to go into all of it. There's a lot of different things that really that tree could represent that He put into the water. But they moved on. God led them to move on. And the next thing they know, they're in a place and God begins to provide food for them. Manna, this type of a bread that they were together every morning. And twice the bread on the 6th morning, no bread on the 7th morning. And in the evenings, the bird, the quail would come. And they were together to quail. So they ate bread and meat. That was it. That was their primary diet for 40 years. There's different ways of looking at things, and we want to use wisdom. We know this came from God. Bread and meat. Some say that's not a very healthy diet. And they might have had other things to eat. But if their faith was in God, I don't know that it matters exactly what they eat. The Bible says in the last days there will be doctrines of demons. It'll be saying, don't marry, don't eat this, don't eat that. You just need to. There's a lot of teachings out there that I've read them. I've seen people get caught up in them. Not that they're bad, some of them sound good. Only eat organic, only eat vegetables, only eat fruit, all these different things. Be careful. Some of that's wisdom. Some of that is bondage. It's good to eat fruit. It's good to eat vegetables. God didn't have a diet of vegetables and bread. Later, the Levitical priesthood, they ate a lot of meat. And as they did, the sacrifices that people brought, a lot of that was eaten. There was only a couple of them that were completely burned. But a lot of the offerings and sacrifices that were burnt, they were shared. A lot of the Levitical priesthood, they ate. They had a large meat diet. God's not against us eating meat. Some choose to be vegetarians, and that's their choice. At times I've tried that, but it didn't work for me. I try not to eat too much red meat, because sometimes our bodies change as we get older. And sometimes our bodies are saying, I don't like that anymore. Or sometimes we have to listen to our body, and our body says, hey, whatever it is. We have to use wisdom. But I'm just saying this, my point is saying, kind of this, is saying don't get in bondage. You can get in bondage over food and what you eat. And God doesn't want us to. He kept it simple. Bread and water. And He wants it. Later they didn't complain about it. Well, back in Egypt, we had the onions, we had the leeks, we had the garlic, we had this, and, later they were getting tired of this bread, So they started to complain a little bit. God showed them a thing or two. Don't be afraid to just enjoy the simplicity of God. Because sometimes God blesses us. And sometimes just the simplicity of what He has can be a great blessing. But if we look out where the grass looks greener, it may get us into trouble. I don't know, that looks better over there. But if God's leading you, go for it. If not, then don't. Thank God he introduced them to Shabbat as He was telling them, the seventh day you just rest, you just chill out. Don't go out, and you try to go out and you'll find nothing. For 40 years they went through this routine. Of course, He says there's a few that, and plus He told them, don't save it. What you get, eat it that day, and that's it. If you save it, don't. Some tried to save it, it turned into worms. You ever had worms in your food? They have a little bug sometimes, and sometimes what they call weevils. You call them weevils. You ever, you're hungry, and all of a sudden you open a jar or whatever, and you see these little bugs, and they go back over the leg, they can eat it anyway. But I don't know, weevils, worms and bugs, and Moses got upset.
More protein.
And well, some say more protein. But the idea 10, where it tells us quite a bit of things there about this. I'm just going to kind of read a couple of the verses here even now. Don't be ignorant, brethren, that our fathers were all under the cloud. They all passed through the sea. They were all baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. So it even describes not just baptized in the Reed Sea, but even the idea of the cloud. They all ate the same spiritual food. They all drank that same spiritual drink. For they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Messiah. Of course, it does say that yet God was not pleased with many of them, for they were scattered in a desert place. They lusted, they idolized, they committed fornication, they tested Messiah, and many of them died. It says, let this be an example, a warning to us, that we may be careful, that we don't fall into that same trap, the same pattern, not power. God has great things for us as people, and He wants to lead us. He wants to be our shepherd. Whether He's leading us by cloud or leading us by fire, He wants to guide us, and it may be different for different people. In different times, God has done different things. When you look at history and the moves of God, as Brother Harold, I was talking to another brother earlier, back in the 70s, they had what was called the Jesus movement. Later, during history, you'll see where they had healing movements. Maybe in the 50s or whatever this was. I mean, incredible things. It would just blow your mind. Just healing revival thing. Later, the 80s or so, they had the big charismatic movement. At different times, we see God kind of manifesting His presence in unique ways among His people. But it was God doing the work. And we're to not just forget what happened. That's God. Like forget a testimony, forget a victory that God gave us. We can learn from history. And we look at what God did. And then He said God's going to do a great thing. And as the end approaches, before Messiah comes back, God's going to do another move. And everybody's wondering, well, what's that move going to be next? Where is it going to happen? At times, God has moved in revival in certain places where thousands of people have come in and got saved and rescued and called upon the Lord for salvation, delivered from drugs and all kinds of different things. And as God moves, usually it doesn't just, as history shows, it just happened. But a lot of times it started because people started getting hungry, thirsty, started crying out to God. This rock that provided water didn't just happen just because, well, I think this will be fun, God said, let's just do this. Moses, you get your stick and you hit the rock. Later, one day, this is going to be called baseball, but right now we're just doing it didn't just happen. But they cried out to God. They were thirsty. They were hungry. God showed Moses that tree and the miracle happened. It didn't just happen. They cried out to God. Moses was crying out to God. When all of that and things happened, it was for a season. For this season that they were in the desert, and it stopped. It didn't happen anymore. The cloud and the fire were for a season, and then it stopped. The water from the rock was for a season, and then it stopped. But how did it start? It started because there was a need, because there was a desperate cry to God, because there were people serious about desperate. When we see Messiah as He went about doing good and healing all and repressing the devil, He wasn't just walking around just doing whatever He felt. A lot of times people had needs and they were wrong Him. Help me, Master. Have mercy, Son of David. People were desperate. And those who were desperate were crying out to Him. And He was meeting their needs. We live in a day and age where God's going to have to make us desperate for Him. Yeah. Woe. Remember the churches, woe, because one of the churches in the book of Revelation, woe, you're rich, you think you got it all, yet you don't. Well, we think we're just perfect. I was talking to a couple of brothers here this morning. We were talking about in the day when they had the Word of Faith movement, the name it, claim it type group. I remember one year I read a book, many, many years ago. After I read the book, I thought, you know what? I can just name, claim whatever I want. I can just speak it. I can just go out and grab it. And I thought, why do I need the Bible? And this is really what I came to believe and think. I thought, why do I need the Bible? Why do I even need to pray? I can just speak it. so that was I just thought, wow, just by faith, I can just do anything. So, it brought me out of the need for God. It brought me to a place where I think I am a God. I'm like a God. I can just, we have to be careful of foolish teaching. Sometimes there's droves of false teachings that come. And then a movement is birthed from that. The brother that came here when we were there at Fredericksburg, where he had started a great work there from the other country, I can't remember his name, but he was honest with us, and he said he started it because there was a group of Chabad Jews there, and they provoked him to jealousy and almost stirred because they were reaching out to people and he wasn't. And he thought, why isn't there a Messianic group proclaiming Messiah, a Jewish Messianic group here? And he thought, they're bold and they're out there, and I'm not. And part of that was what burst what God had for me. He prayed and God led him. He didn't just do it with that mode or that method. But sometimes God uses things like that. God used Paul, the Apostle Paul, to persecute the early believers, to spread them. Remember before they were he told them to go into all the world, and Jerusalem and Samaria to the uttermost part of the earth. Well, that feels uncomfortable. That must be expensive. Well, that's inconvenient. Can't we just do it here in my own home, on my computer? Okay, God bless you. Yeshua is Lord. Okay, yeah, amen. That's where we're at today. I do a lot of things at home on the computer. In some ways it's good, and we can reach a lot of people. But in some ways it's bad because it does make us lazy. God used Paul before he became born again to spread them out, to stir them up. If God doesn't get us to move the easy way, he will move us. And it may be the hard way, but he will move us out. If we don't get desperate for God and cry out to him in hunger, he may allow things to happen so that we will do that, because he knows that will begin to release the kingdom of heaven on our behalf. It's not just going to come so we think, wow, that would be cool, a miracle happening here or this, not just because we wish it, not just because we think it. Oh, I want to see God move in this place. Some say, oh, we believe that the end time revival will be a Messianic revival. I don't know what it's going to be. I know there's going to be something. I know there's going to be something that God's going to do. I'm honest with you in all honesty. I've heard all kind of preachers say all kind of things. And I really don't know for sure what it's going to look like, what it's going to be called. And I don't know that I really care. I just know that it's going to happen. As we get closer to the end and people really wake up, God makes them uncomfortable in their sin. He makes them uncomfortable in their pathetic laziness. This whole 10-month or so trial of all the plagues, God was doing some things. He was preparing Israel for their departure. He could have just snapped and they were gone. But he had to do it a certain way, not just to make his name known to Egypt, but to prepare them. God does things many times to prepare us, to prepare our hearts, to prepare our minds, to prepare us to receive from him. We may be thinking, wow, I haven't received from God in a while. Or some may be thinking, wow, I really haven't heard his voice in a while. Some may be saying, I really haven't felt his presence in a while. Or whatever it is. Or some may be saying, I really haven't been really healed supernaturally by him in a while. Or we may say, maybe we used to prophesy and we don't. Maybe we used to pray in tongues and we don't. Whatever it may be. We need to get to that place when we're desperate for him. And we get serious about him. Because if we still like the things that are keeping us in bondage, then we'll stay there. When we begin to hate it, we begin to cry out. Remember the woman with the issue of blood? She meant business. She was weak. She shouldn't have been out in public because she was unclean. But she was out in the midst until she finally touched him. Remember that old song? Zacchaeus was a wee little man. He was a little guy, and he was determined to see this man they called Messiah climbing up in a tree. There were people that were desperate. The people that tore up the roof to let their friend down. It was called desperation. People that were desperate to see God's help. power available. Sometimes our prayers are just weak. Sometimes our prayers are just earthly, worldly, humanly, and they're not touching heaven. And heaven's not touching us because we're just thinking about ourselves. And we're just thinking, oh, poor me. Oh, poor old me. I just wish I had this or had that. And God has so much more for us. So much more. Sometimes we get caught up in certain things. And Israel here in history, they got caught up on things, but God kept showing them His hand, showing them His power. Here in the end, they actually go to battle with Amalek here in chapter 17. In our Torah portion, sometimes we're going to have battles in life. Chapter 17, verse number 8. And Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim. And Moshe said to Yehoshua, choose for us men and go out and fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I'm stationing myself on the top of the hill with a rod of God in my hand. And Yehoshua did as Moshe said to him, to fight with Amalek. And Moshe, Aharon, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. And it came to be that when Moshe held up his hand, that Israel prevailed. And when he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moshe's hands were heavy. And so they took a stone, and they put it under him, and he sat up. And Aaron and Hur supported his hands, one on one side, and the other on the other side. And his hands were steady until they were going down to the sun. Isn't that something? When he had his hands up with the rod of God in his hand, Israel was winning. When his hands got weak, Israel began to lose. They say whatever team you're voting for the Super Bowl, you keep your hands raised, they might win. Something about faith. Is it a sign of faith, of desperation, of prayer, of victory? Could be a lot of those things. The Bible talks about us lifting our hands. So he lifted his hands. They won. Of course, sometimes when you see a race, sometimes people win, they lift their hands, kind of victory, that type of thing. Maybe if the idea was he's proclaiming victory. With his hands down, defeat. He's proclaiming victory. They went. What are we proclaiming? What are we proclaiming with our lives, with our words, with our thoughts, with our actions? Are we proclaiming that there's a God? Would people know that we saw us and they saw how we lived and talked? Would they say, wow, there's a God in heaven, I just know it. I see that person, I just know it. Or would they say, you know what? There's a God, I sure don't know it by looking at that person. And by looking at that person, and that's what a believer's like. I don't want to be one. It happens. Well, I don't want that responsibility. Well, we all accept it when we accept Messiah. We become partakers with Him. We become ambassadors for Him. People watch you. People look at you. I don't know that they were looking at Moses, but there was just something about what he did, just even in his hand motions. Doesn't say he was saying anything. Doesn't say he was praying. It doesn't say really anything other than the fact that he had his hand raised and the rod of God. Sometimes it doesn't take much to win a victory with God. He had to have help. He got weak. He got tired. And people came to help him. Aharon and Hur. He was sitting on a rock. He was older at this time. He was way up past 80. They helped hold his hands up. Sometimes we need to truly help each other, help hold each other's hands up. Sometimes we fight against each other, we're jealous of each other. Remember the blind man, oh, son of David, Messiah, have mercy on me. Please be quiet. And he began to yell louder. Yeshua, son of David, have mercy on me. Be quiet. But then he called them to him. Sometimes we're doing that. We're rather than helping people, we're trying to push them back, push them down. You have a testimony? Oh, get out of here. We don't have time for that. I want to say by name, not just in word, not just, who are you? Well, I don't know, I'm a believer. What kind of believer? I believe in the Word of God. God loves us, and He wants us to have victory. He hit the rock and the water came out. I don't know how it worked. It says that rock followed them. That rock was Messiah. Later, when he hit it, he got in trouble. I think that's next week. That kept him from the promised land. How did the water keep coming? The way I read, the water just kept coming out. It was just a continual flow. Did they do something to like a water fountain? They hit a button on it? I kind of wonder. I don't know how it worked exactly, but God worked it. God the manna. The quail. How did that work? But it worked. Sometimes we can't figure things out in our mind or our intellect because it's not meant to be. Just something we just have to trust God. Sometimes there are groups that are full of intellectual people that try to intellectually examine the scriptures and do all this different thing. Some of it can be. But at times we just analyze so much that our faith decreases. I've been in some places and some congregations, man, they had faith and it was powerful. Sometimes they didn't have a lot of knowledge. They had a lot of zeal, a lot of fire, a lot of faith, and a lot of miracles. Then I've been in other places where there was a lot of sophistication, a lot of knowledge. And they both were good places. But I didn't see a lot of fire. I didn't see a lot of miracles per se. Why is that? Is God against intelligence? No. I think there can be a good combination of both. God wants us to be intelligent. God wants us to be wise, but He doesn't want us to lose our fire. He doesn't want us to lose our zeal. He doesn't want us to lose our faith in the process of trying to get more in tune with Him and knowledgeable. Sometimes we have to keep that balance. We have to keep that balance and keep that heart for Him. To know Him, to be desperate for Him, to cry out to Him, say, God, show me something. Show me a tree. God, I've got better things in my life. Show me a tree, whatever that may be, to help me. Maybe we've got some bitter things we're going through. Just say, God, show me what do I do? That's why we need to hear His voice. We need to be able to hear and discern what He's saying to us. Spending time with Him. Sometimes I've heard of miracles happening. Sometimes I've heard of revival starting because of one person that heard God, told that person to do something, they did, and miracles happened. I'm going to get ready to close out here. Years ago, I was in a church setting, little church. It was a church where I met my wife, and we were there for a season. I used to teach adult Sunday school there. This is many years ago. A different place, a different time. One time during the services, we were just there, and there was a few people up for prayer, and I heard God speak to me. And God said, go touch that one young man there in the back. I thought, okay. So I did. I just walked up and kind of touched him on the back. Didn't say a word. He just fell out in the spirit. Maybe it helped him. I don't know. I just went and sat back down. I just thought, wow, I guess that was God. If it was me, that wouldn't have happened. Does that happen every day for you? Well, that's awesome. No, it doesn't. At that same church, whenever I very first taught there, before I was even going there, before I taught a message, I heard God speak to me, and He said, someone here's got a pain with their left knee or something like that. I heard Him speak to me, but I was afraid. I was like, oh, if I make a mistake, that might be God. If I make a mistake, boy, then they're really not listening to this message. And so later, when I finished my sermon and I asked for prayer, actually the pastor's daughter, several people came up to pray, but the pastor's daughter at that time, she came up, and she had told me, can you pray for my left knee if it's hurting? Whatever, the same identical thing God had spoke to me. And I thought, wow, that's what God told me. I was just too afraid. And I thought, wow, what if I wouldn't have been afraid? And I would have released that. What would have happened? What kind of faith would have been released? And I don't know. They'll never know. Because I was too afraid. Sometimes it may be as we think, well, what would have happened if I would have trusted that word and I would have followed that word? What would have happened? Well, it's not too late. Don't think about your mistakes. I'm just bringing that up and say, hey, it's too late. And God wants to use each one of us in different ways, and He may say something to us for someone else's benefit, show us something, I always think, it doesn't matter if I make a mistake. I'd rather at least fail trying than to fail to try. I just say, sorry, I made a mistake. We may look like the fool. Maybe that's the problem. Too prideful. Thinking, what am I going to look like? What are they going to say? What are they going to think? There's already enough quacks and cuckoos out there. When we really know He's speaking to us, and we really become fine-tuned to Him, then and sometimes when God speaks to me, it's not like telling me to do this or that, kind of what we're saying. Sometimes it's for me and guiding me. So as we begin to hear His voice, it's not always, because sometimes people get caught up. It's like they think God's speaking to them, but it's always for something else, and to someone else, and it's always something weird. God told me to tell you need to do this. Or sometimes we have people that do that, where they think they're hearing God, and they're like, God told me to tell you this, and it's just crazy stuff. We've had people over the years. So I feel for people like that, and I encourage people to hear, but at the same time, there's other voices out there. We have to discern God's voice. And it's not a power thing. Well, God told me to tell you this, and if you don't, I can tell you story after story of people that have come through these doors that have said things, just some of the craziest things you wouldn't believe, and so we live in that time. We live in that day and age where, there's going to be people like that, but don't let people like that and circumstances like that hinder you. Well, I think it's best, it's kind of like saying this, well, I think it's just best maybe I just back away and don't even try it. I don't want to be labeled as one of those. I don't want to be labeled as a person that's making mistakes. I'm not even going to try it all. As a young boy in first, second, third grade, whatever it was, somebody had peed on the toilet seat in our class. And the teacher was determined to find out who was doing it. And so anybody that went to the bathroom, they had to write their name real big on the chalkboard. And so and the bathroom got checked after every person. So I thought, you know what? I'm not going to mess with this. I'm just going to hold it till I get home. So very first season, I wouldn't even go to the bathroom all day. I thought, I'm just not really going to put up with this. And so I did. As soon as I got home, I was like, I got to go to the bathroom. But I just thought, I don't want to be labeled. And of course, that mentality, can carry over. It's like, well, I'm just going to just forget the whole thing. And be careful of that. The enemy has counterfeits. The enemy has lies, but that doesn't mean the truth is any less real. The enemy has counterfeit signs and wonders, but that doesn't mean God's signs and wonders are any less true or real. So some say, just stay away from all that kind of stuff, because blah, blah, blah,